I once saw a movie like that, all about revenge.
I'm going to stomp on you, Johnny. Every time I see you.
"1961 was not the best year for the new action genre. The year that gave us Breakfast at Tiffany's and West Side Story is, I suspect, going to go down as one of the easiest years to choose a handful of films for the top 5. There was still a significant push for black and white on the medium, with a lot of these movies having that classic noir look, but the vibrance of color is clearly edging that out. As Hercules had become successful, several Steve Reeves films from the previous year saw their re-release in 1961, notably The White Warrior and Morgan the Pirate. Reeves had competition for the role of Hercules, however, with an Englishman named Reg Park.
I'll go along in case you need protection.
Where are we headed for?
Hades.
Wonderful.
Park is absolutely massive and played the character in both Hercules Conquers Atlantis and Hercules in the Haunted World. Reeves was moving on to other roles in any case, appearing in The Thief of Baghdad and the first part of a Trojan War epic called The Trojan Horse. And honestly, I think Reeves was much better suited toward these more action-heavy roles. In addition to his athletic physique, he has this great sense of movement, and he can really swing a sword. Mark Forrest also continued making his strongman movies in Italy, with Maciste, the strongest man in the world, coming out. It's kind of a poor film, but there are some fun uses of the character's supposed mega strength in order to fight his enemies. It wasn't just peplum movies being produced in Italy, though. We also got the swashbuckling pirate film The Secret of the Black Falcon, a fairly blatant ripoff of the best action film from 1960, Female Slave Ship, but, not nearly as competent. Also, there was A Child of Today. In contrast with the sword and sandals, peplum and pirate movies being produced in Italy, this film goes for a more realistic approach. The characters, drama, and fistfights feel real. As does Gunfire. It definitely has more European sensibilities while resembling Sam Fuller's output from the time. Fuller had come out with Underworld USA, a dark crime film about the cost of criminality and revenge.
The third one, he got barbecued.
In the United States, there was still an interest in these kind of mobster-related films. And in that vein, we got King of the Roaring Twenties, the story of Arnold Rothstein, which is pretty good, but not action-heavy enough to dwell on. One film drawing upon the success of previous years' Rise and Fall of Legs Diamond is Mad Dog Cole.
No, please.
Though a pale imitation of the former, it is interesting in that they switched the ending for these films, as they are both based on true events. While the precise turn of events may never be fully known, it is largely agreed upon that Legs Diamond was killed by a cop, while the real Mad Dog Cole was killed in a mob hit. In the Rise and Fall of Legs Diamond, the titular character is bumped off by a silent hitman, while the film version of Mad Dog Cole is finally killed in a police ambush. Aside from that interesting tidbit, the movie features the big screen debut of Telly Savalas, and you can spot a young Gene Hackman if you don't blink. In fact, 1961 is when you start seeing a lot of faces you may be familiar with from later movies. From Charles Bronson's small role in A Thunder of Drums,
All right, Lieutenant. I'm gonna cut you up into bits and then we'll talk business.
to Christopher Lee in the aforementioned Hercules in the Haunted World as the main villain.
O God of evil, the great dragon has swallowed the moon.
It's worth mentioning as well, in the tout British thriller The Frightened City, we got what probably should have been the breakout performance of young Sean Connery.
They used to fight all day with that on. They must have perspired like fury. You suffer from the taint of gentility, Mr. Damien. The word is sweat.
Connery adeptly alternates between cool and tense here, becomes something of an anti-hero by the film's ending.
An eye for an eye.
Very biblical. But how would it advantage you to expose yourself to a charge of having eliminated him?
You suffer from the taint of gentility, Mr. Zernikoff. The word is murdered.
And if you're paying attention in the later parts of the movie, The Day the Earth Caught Fire has Michael Caine in his first speaking role.
Keep moving, please, down to the embankment. The road's closed.
Can I get back on at the other end?
Not tonight. This district's out of bounds.
For medical reasons?
No, there's some teenage kids kicking it up a bit. They lit a few fires, looted a bit of water.
The Day the Earth Caught Fire is an excellent film of its type, though it may be more fondly remembered for the gimmick you can see in some prints where they color the image in a dingy orange to give the impression of heat. It reminds me of the look of the Vegas sequences from Blade Runner 2049. I'd also put Atlantis: The Lost Continent in the disaster film category with The Day the Earth Caught Fire. It starts out as a kind of low-rent fantasy adventure movie, but eventually goes the way of disaster by the end. And while it has some cool imagery, there is nothing I'd call particularly action-y except this death laser blasting everything towards the end of the film. Speaking of disaster movies, I watched one called The Devil at 4 O'Clock, which had some good effects. In fact, the helicopter filming the explosions almost crashed by getting too close. There were some smaller films in 1961 attempting to shoulder into the genre. The Beast of Yucca Flats, though, is notoriously bad. Bad direction and even worse editing, though there is a decent shot of a plane chasing a man stolen straight from North by Northwest. Faring much better is Blast of Silence, not only one of the great early Hitman films, but also one of the early thrillers set at Christmas, which gives it a unique feel for the time. In fact, I'd say it's different from just about everything being released stateside that year. It's more like a European crime film and likely inspired its fair amount, up to and including similar Hitman movies like Jean-Pierre Melville's 1967 film Le Samurai. And then there is Bloodlust, a low-rent adaptation of The Most Dangerous Game. Bloodlust almost feels like a joke. Other than a few violent scenes, one of which is reminiscent of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's nothing too special here. Though the lead female is competent in judo and kills a goon using it. With a small sequence in The Frightened City, judo is almost making its big screen debut here. In terms of action, it would be the usual genres that brought the goods. War and Western. Speaking of early roles, Armored Command features a young Burt Reynolds who goes all Audie Murphy and mows down waves of soldiers. It's an effective and bleak war movie, alternating between great scenes like its killer silent opening and the final terrifying tank attack. What keeps the movie from being great is its awkward pacing and also some bad editing, including reused shots and misplaced scenes. But if you're a fan of the time and the genre, it's definitely worth checking out. War is Hell is another dark and violent war movie. Famously, it's the movie Lee Harvey Oswald was watching when he was arrested. Unfortunately, a good chunk of the movie is missing, so though there are some decently staged action scenes, there isn't enough left of this film to fairly rate it among the top 5. Coming closer is Battle at Bloody Beach. Audie Murphy braves a war zone for his love and gets caught up in the conflict.
We thought you were dead.
Well, I'm not. Sorry.
Though not much happens for a good deal of the running time, there is a decent hand-to-hand fight scene, and when the shooting does start, it makes up for the wait. In a similar vein is The Steel Claw, produced, written, directed, and starring George Montgomery. This one is kind of a men on a mission type film. The action picks up considerably once the team takes over a train and uses it to raid an enemy base. There's a fairly captivating scene where Montgomery, who is missing a hand for the duration of the film, fashions the titular claw. There have been echoes of this scene from Army of Darkness on to the fourth Rambo film. Worth mentioning in the war category is the period epic El Cid starring Charlton Heston.
Will you give me your prisoner, or must I take him?
There are 13 of us, and you're alone.
What you do is against God's law. Were you 13 times 13, I would not be alone.
Though 3 hours long, the movie has plenty of great sword fights and battles made up of hundreds of extras. The direction does a great job at giving everything a sense of scale and grandness, and the editing is superb. The effective use of smooth, fast cuts and back and forth editing make for some exciting battles. If you like this sort of thing, this one's also worth checking out. You can see how this kind of movie influenced later films of its type like Braveheart. El Cid's direction is the polar opposite of something like Nefertiti, Queen of the Nile, which relies on jamming as many people and movement into a frame as possible to simulate action instead of decent stunts or choreography. In terms of westerns, I found myself somewhat disappointed in Gun Street. The director, Edward Kahn, had made the previous year's Three Came to Kill, which had some decent action scenes, and Gun Street had about none.
She's all yours, boy.
Sam Peckinpah made his directorial debut with The Deadly Companions, though despite some nice turns by Maureen O'Hara and Brian Keith, this isn't what you'd call an action-packed western. O'Hara gets to show off some sex appeal, but there's really nothing else to write home about. The year started with Five Guns to Tombstone, which was decent enough, but by halfway through the year, with films like The Gambler Wore a Gun, you could see the old western genre losing steam. Fortunately, there was an effort to change up the genre.
Come out of there.
With Posse from Hell, you could really feel it getting a shot in the arm. Directed by Herbert Coleman, who had often worked with Alfred Hitchcock and done second unit mostly in films as far back as the Alan Ladd adventure flick China. Posse from Hell is an early example of what would eventually come to be known as a buddy cop action movie.
Let's go get him.
Though it starts out as something like a men on a mission film, the cast is dwindled down until it's just Audie Murphy and a very game John Saxon going after the bad guys. The movie is excellent, and if it were a bit more action heavy, it would make the list. As a film from Japan had topped my list for 1960, it's worth going into what was going on there. Mothra is definitely one of the weirder movies I've ever seen, though if I were to compare it to its nearest Western competitor, the British beast movie Conga, Mothra is easily much better. Raizo Ishikawa finished out his Satan's Sword trilogy, and Shintaro Katsu, who had been attempting to mold a career path similar to that of Ishikawa, finally found success playing a tough Yakuza type with the heart of gold in Tough Guy, known in Japan as Akumio. Akumio's action focus is on realism. The violence isn't stylized or even all that common in the film, but it struck a chord with Japanese audiences. Shintaro Katsu would become known better worldwide for his Zatoichi films the following year, but the Akumio films, though far less action and spectacle heavy, were of near equal popularity in Japan. Katsu also starred in Kojiro's Turning Swallow Cut, a telling of the early life of famed Japanese swordsman Sasaki Kojiro. Sweeping cinematography and excellent fight choreography make this one a sort of hidden classic if you ask me. The cinema of Japan is just miles ahead during this period. director of 1960's The Last Gunfight, Keiichi Okamoto, gave us Big Shots Die at Dawn, a loose retelling of Hamlet, with clever editing and, again, a lot of shooting. There are some better set pieces this time around, but it's still not quite right for my list. Villains in Broad Daylight, also known as High Noon for Gangsters, is an excellent heist thriller in the style of the French New Wave. Directed by Kinji Fukasaku and featuring a diverse cast speaking both English and Japanese, and starring prolific Japanese star Tetsuro Tamba, this is a thrilling heist film, worthy of rediscovery. It's got some great action at the end, with a gunfight involving dynamite and 3 teams of enemies, all vying for the same prize. If there were more sequences like that ending battle, it probably would have made my list as well. Now, before I head into the top 5, I would like to highlight a couple other movies. Master of the World, an adaptation of Jules Verne's stories Rober the Conqueror and the Master of the World novel, is actually more of a ripoff and attempt to ape the success of Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Though instead of a submarine, the main villain, Vincent Price, in place of James Mason, flies an airship. And instead of Kirk Douglas, we have Charles Bronson. Bronson is even dressed in a similar fashion. Unfortunately, Bronson doesn't sing a song, and there is nothing even remotely as fantastic as the squid fight from 20,000.
Mr. Turner, quick! We're losing height!
For Jules Verne adaptations, you're better off with The Mysterious Island. The other movie worth mentioning is Karate Hand of Death. Often touted as the first American martial arts film, it actually follows in the footsteps of Blood on the Sun. Despite some filmmaking ineptitude, this is a love letter to the Japanese art of karate. In fact, the movie stops dead for a section just to explain what karate is and defend it against claims of it just being a violent activity.
A master of karate might be a dangerous man. Well, but so could any man with a pistol, a knife, or any weapon for that matter. Remember, what we practice here is a sport. If a man would kill with karate, he would also kill with any other weapon.
Karate Hand of Death is something of a blueprint for nearly all later American martial arts films, in that it fetishizes the Japanese. That being said, it has to be appreciated the cast and crew is made up almost entirely of the local population, and though the story is a bit clunky and offbeat, there are parts that work quite well. Heck, even the instructional karate sequence also sets up the killing blow at the end quite nicely.
See, on a fist of this sort, the force is on the whole area. On a hand like this, the same force is on the fingertips, just like the point of a blade.
And with those out of the way, here are the top 5 action movies of 1961. Yojimbo. For 1960, Magnificent Seven made the top 5, and that owed its very existence to Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. Yojimbo, Kurosawa's 21st film, owes nearly as much to the American Western. A dusty, dangerous, lawless town, 2 rival factions battling out over who gets control while the local residents suffer. This is a Western in the classic sense, but Kurosawa does it with his own style, a blend partly inspired by European films and the Westerns of John Ford. As if to wear its inspiration on its sleeve, Yojimbo even has a character carry a revolver. Toshiro Mifune shows up here with roguish charm and brutal tactility. Kurosawa used the choreography of famed Japanese swordsman Yoshio Sugino to bring Mifune's character to life. The speed with which Mifune moves from an almost non-committal stillness to blinding ferocity is startling. The sequences of sword fights are often wide-angle long takes with cuts only used for effects. The result is an impressive bit of movement. As the camera tracks the battle, Mifune moves through his opponents not like a choreographed dance, but like a quickly improvised and skilled attack. And then back to his default mode. An effective score and a competent and savvy hero gives us something new here. Cool. There is style in both the filmmaking and acting here, and it makes for an interesting protagonist whom we root for, despite knowing next to nothing about the character for the duration of the film. Yojimbo is simply great, and for the purposes of this list, it's also a solid action movie. Drifting Detective 2, Black Wind in the Harbor. Among the multitude of firsts in 1961 is director Kinji Fukasaku, making a splash with 5 films released this year, the first 2 being the Drifting Detective movies. These are mystery thrillers about greed and corruption, but the main draw for me is leading man Sonny Chiba. Chiba stars as Goro Saionji, a private detective and sort of the laughing hero type. But although he does engage in silly shenanigans, he is a true kick-ass hero, a whirlwind of feet and fists, and just as good with his rifle. Now, Black Wind in the Harbor is the second film out of 2, and while the first was more of a classic-style western, this one is trying to go for that old Hollywood noir style. Chiba finds himself up against a smuggling operation, and it's up to him and a couple pals he meets along the way to take the bad guys down. What follows is fighting, shooting, and even a boat capsizing during a storm and a gunfight in the middle. It's a lot of fun. The Comancheros.
Well, those are the fellas we want to hear about, those bad companions.
And John Wayne returns to the top 5, though slipping back a notch to number 3. The Comancheros is one of the last of the great classic-style westerns, though it's really kind of cobbled together from other movies like Veracruz and the previous year's 7 Ways from Sundown. It was directed by Michael Curtiz, who also directed such classics as The Adventures of Robin Hood, Angels with Dirty Faces, and of course, Casablanca.
Looking at you, kid.
And so in addition to feeling similar to the aforementioned films, there is a strong focus on camaraderie. With Curtiz suffering from cancer during production, the movie was actually helmed by Wayne for much of the filming, and the movie does seem to suffer a bit from this clash of styles. But where Curtiz was at his best in drama and scale, Wayne is at his best in action. Indeed, Wayne brought his old friend and frequent collaborator, the stuntman legend Cliff Lyons, to help direct with the action scenes. Lyons had done much of the action work on Wayne's other films, including on The Alamo. The Comancheros is a film that seems, in retrospect, hyper-aware of what the other films in the genre are doing at the time, and attempts to ape and supplant them. You can see shades of Comanche Station during the shootouts, and the film's ending even attempts to top the great chase scene from Wayne's own iconic breakout film, Stagecoach. The spectacle of a burning stage and a gunfight and chase is so well conceived, it's surprising you don't hear this one mentioned along with Wayne's more well-known classics. John Wayne himself is in fantastic form here, commanding and still throwing himself into the action with vigor and enthusiasm. He doesn't get too dark, but just enough shows through when he needs to.
I'm gonna take particular delight in seeing you hang.
And there is a fun extended role for the great Lee Marvin as well. Sadly, this would be the final film of Michael Curtiz, who would die within a few months of the movie's release. It's one of the film industry's great ironies that John Wayne, well before his fame, worked in a prop department and as an extra in the 1928 religious epic Noah's Ark. The director? Michael Curtiz. Yet Wayne went from an uncredited worker for Curtiz to taking over him is incredible enough that The Comancheros remains a fun romp after all these years is a credit to all involved.
2.
Drifting Detective, Tragedy in the Red Valley. The first film in the Drifting Detective series was also the debut feature film of famed Japanese director Kinji Fukasaku, and serves as a fitting beginning for a long and illustrious career. And speaking of first, this is the first film for which Sonny Chiba played the lead. and it's an explosive debut. Even as a young man, Chiba exhibits a tense and powerful physicality that lends itself well to the action genre. And the movie gives him plenty to do here. Tragedy in the Red Valley is essentially a Japanese western about criminals trying to force hard-working farmers off their land using illegal means. Chiba's private detective, in place of the usual government-sent marshal, gets involved, and there is plenty of fighting, shooting, and explosions as a result. The drifting detective movies are good fun, partly because they exist in different genres. It's too bad there were only 2 of them. But Chiba would become a mainstay in the action genre, participating in some of his best and well-known films. But as I said, this is one hell of a debut. The Guns of Navarone. Of course, the only thing that could compare to the previous films on the list would be a war film. Unlike most of the other war films of the time, The Guns of Navarone is a completely fictitious story, using the very real World War II as a backdrop for espionage adventure-style action scenes. With its large cast of colorful characters, singular objective, and rousing climax, this movie, along with The Magnificent Seven and other war films like The Steel Claw and Back to Baton, The Guns of Navarone is one of the major prototypes for the Men on a Mission movies that would follow. This film represents a clear turning point for the genre, leaning heavily on the sheer spectacle of the action with thrilling adventure set pieces thrown in the mix. But even ignoring the movie's obvious influence, this is simply an exciting flick. The fast-paced editing, powerful sound mixing, and gorgeous cinematography blend together to create a ferocious epic. The director, J. Lee Thompson, who would make the great Cape Fear the following year, keeps the film running at a steady jog. But it's the efforts of second unit director Peter Yates and stunt coordinator Bob Simmons who deserve credit for the tense fight scenes and well-staged gun battles that break into action in a cacophony of bullet fire and grenade explosions. Yates has a distinct, singular style, bringing together the carnage of sudden movement with the quiet of a terse stare. His most well-known film, Bullet, features probably Steve McQueen's most memorable and iconic role, and is a solid car chase film as well. Here, Yates frames every character as having their own little stories within an action set piece. In one particular memorable moment, each of the team, made up of Anthony Quinn, Gregory Peck, David Niffen, and more, do their part to take down an entire German boat and its crew in about 30 seconds. The cross-cutting accomplishes a lot to show their efficiency, and Bob Simmons' falls and Burning Man stunt goes a long way in establishing the concussive impact of the explosions. More gunfights, a tense climbing scene, and a ship in a storm makes some fun action moments as the team make their way to destroy the film's titular big guns. The Guns of Navarone is understandably a classic movie, and my pick for Best of 1961. The standout action sequence of the year would have to go to the same movie in that previously mentioned boat fight. It's quick, but it is so well choreographed and edited it just really stands out. The rest of the movie is really good, mind you, but that little sequence is just head and shoulders above the rest. Tragedy in the Red Valley probably comes closest in having a sequence that compares in its explosive finale. But I think The Guns of Navarone still takes it here. One thing the drift-in detective movies have, however, is a breakout star in Sonny Chiba. I might be swayed more simply by the fact that there are 2 movies featuring Chiba's Goro Saionji, but his is the one that left an impression on me for the year.
Yeah.
The far-traveling, laughing private detective with his rifle skills and fighting prowess is almost too much. But I love his sense of honor as is shown with the fancily dressed gun-for-hire who follows him and challenges him across both films. And I love that he lives out of his office where he sleeps fully clothed while wearing only one glove. And with that, I close out 1961. See you guys soon for the next year.